So we'll change up a little bit here and start talking about funding. I know this is near and dear to at least two of the people up there. So Carrollton is on a path of funding that requires rolling bond elections about every 4 years. This means we are basically funding services and improvements with overlapping 20-year mortgages, guaranteeing the city will be in debt for virtually ever. Do you agree with this? And what is your philosophy on funding city budget items with bonds versus saving for specific projects and paying as you go? And a couple things to keep in mind. Texas has the second largest debt per capita behind New York. And then over 1/3 of our tax bill right now is for the interest of the existing debt, and it's being added to the newer elections. So, Mr. Sun? Well, we can jump over to Mr. Bell, who was I believe, on the board of the committee that passed this bond election. So maybe it's a good place to start.
Okay, thank you. The dependence upon bond packages and basically taking out a loan for our future is not something that anybody wants to continue, nor is it a decision to promote or vote for such a package is taken lightly. Carrollton has over $1 billion worth of assets, and we have a budget that is much less than that attributed to maintenance and upkeep of those facilities and infrastructure, roads and utilities. And we don't have a huge source of income. We have sales tax that fluctuates. We have property values that are not as high as we'd like them to be. One way that we can accentuate and promote our property values and new development is by maintaining and improving that infrastructure and by encouraging development, which raises the property values not only of our homeowners but also of our businesses, increases our sales tax revenue, which can over time, as we learn from our experiences and from our mistakes, we can pay off that debt, build up more of a cash reserve, and pay as we go. But by ignoring what we have and what needs to be done, we experience further degradation of those utilities and infrastructure and lose the opportunity to bring in new development and turn the tide against long-term debt.
Thank you. Mr. Bell?
Yes, obviously with debt you have to be very careful, right? When it's approaching 25-30% of your overall uses and sources, that becomes a bit of a problem, right? It is a mortgage that we have to pay off, and we're passing it on to our children. None of us in this room are in favor of that, clearly. We have to be careful about when we do approve bond elections that we know exactly what we're approving. Okay, I'll be honest with you. When it comes down to the bond election, I did vote for elements of the bond election, as did 80% of the population in our city. Okay, the voting population that actually came out to vote. So with that, I mean, I'll tell you first and foremost, I'm not in favor of long-term plans and strategies whereby you replace debt with debt with debt with debt and you service maintenance items with debt. You have to pay and you have to fund as you go. You have to build that tax base of retail sales and use tax rates and property values by increasing values, both retail, establishing bustling shopping centers, and establishing and optimizing our property values. That's where we need to spend more time focusing on with such things like matching funding associated with our retail developers who are buying property and bringing money to the table. Where we have that, we ought to be open to matching some of that. But just funding maintenance items and so forth with debt dollars and passing it on to the future generations, not in favor of it.
Mr. Wallace?
I'm strongly opposed to bonds and the use of them. I have been for 3 years. I ran on this when I got on council 3 years ago. It troubles me to no end. Our number one decision as a council is the financial decision. We approve the budget once a year, which in turn approves the tax rate on the ad valorem taxes. This isn't a surprise to anyone, I think most of you know. I was very disappointed in September when I realized that this bond election was going to pass. And here's why I'm mostly disappointed about it. We spend $8 million a year in interest. 1/3 of every dollar that's collected from ad valorem taxes goes straight to debt servicing. It doesn't even get to the general fund. In my opinion, The general fund should pay for all maintenance and operations, including the assets that we have, sidewalks, alleys, streets. We should not be going to the voters every 4 or 5 years to ask them to approve more debt to pay for this. We have had bonds and debt for over 50 years in the city. That's how long we've been in debt. Our first bond election failed. A month later, they trotted out another one and it passed. We've never had one not pass since then. We have been in debt and will continue to be in debt until we make the decision to stop doing it and to start funding maintenance and operations from the M&O portion of the tax rate.
Thank you, Mr. Sun.
Well, I'm not too crazy about a bond either. It's like a credit card with a high interest rate. You pay the minimum payment every month. Your debt goes forever. So what I'm thinking is that we find the creative ways increase revenue for the city. And you have to find a way because there's always new ways to make money, revenue, and jobs, and reduce taxes. So we don't have to create a bond. And there's a lot of ways. I could tell you a lot about it, but with the limited time, we have to. I have ideas. I have a vision to bring revenues and jobs to the city, lower the taxes, so we don't have to do a bond to fix infrastructure to our city. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to change direction just a little bit again. The first question is going to be just a yes, no. And we'll start with you, Mr. Sung. Do you know what Agenda 21 is and what the principles of it are?
Little bit.
Okay, no, it's this first part.
Yeah.
Mr. Wilder?
Yes.
Mr. Ballard?
Yes.
Yes.
So, Agenda 21, essence, general principles, public control of land use is indispensable. To achieve sustainable development and a higher quality of life for all people, states should reduce and eliminate unsustainable patterns of production and consumption and promote appropriate demographic policies. Human beings are entitled to a healthy and productive life in harmony with nature. That's straight from the Agenda 21 website. So, are you aware of, or give me your opinion about how Carrollton is interacting with Agenda 21? Also, do you know of any NGOs in the North Texas area that are associated and funded by Agenda 21? And if Carrollton has accepted any funds from any of them? And we'll start with you, Mr. Pike.
Okay. When I say I'm familiar with Agenda 21, my knowledge is limited. What I have seen scares me. I do support sustainable development in the sense that you build for the future. You build smartly with renewable energy, renewable resources, products and construction that reduces the footprint and the like. But also, as a councilman, we take an oath to uphold the ordinances and laws of the city, state, and national government. And as of yet, the national government has not adopted it. It was a signature on it, as I understand, but it is a guideline, but is increasingly seems to be becoming more and more of a target. And it's not something that I think Carrollton should be subscribing to as an Agenda 21 follower. There are benefits to sustainable development in its core value, but as for any donations and your other question, no, sir, I'm not familiar.
Mr. Babbitt?
Yeah, again, I'm also not familiar with donations and so forth. I will tell you that from
Sorry, let me interrupt you a minute. These are not donations. They generally come in the way of grants that are proposed for studies or for helping develop certain types of growth patterns that are part of the Agenda 21. So they're not donations per se. Sorry, I can't do that.
My answer's still no, so. Okay.
Yeah, no, and as with Mr. File, I'm also not familiar of any studies or grants and so forth on that. I will tell you though, from the perspective, I'm a businessman, right, and a neighborhood guy, right, and so with those two things in mind, I'm all about, supply and demand. Free economy should drive demographics and the base. ultimately whether or not we're in harmony with nature and so forth ought to come from the free economy and the laws of supply and demand, okay? As it relates to managing demographics, I hold firm on that too. I don't think that the city ought to be doing, the city or any government entity ought to be doing, spending public money to really drive that. I think that'll be a function of the free economy in terms of where funds are allocated, how the demographics become managed and so forth.
Mr. Wilder?
Thank you, Jim. As far as funding, I'm not sure, but I'll get into it in a second. We are not part of ICLEI, which is a good thing, in my opinion. With funding, we do receive funds from the federal government, so in a way, we probably are possibly receiving funds. It is a non-binding, voluntary implemented action, but President Bush, the first President Bush in 1992, did sign it. It was not a treaty, therefore the U.S. Senate never debated it or voted on it. And executive orders were passed by Clinton when he came into office to pretty much put it into effect. So it does exist in this country, and we can't turn a blind eye to it, even though some think it's conspiracy theory. I believe it does exist. In Carrollton, I'm not sure. We do work with NTCOG, which is North Texas Council of Governments. I'm not sure what their role is, what they believe and don't believe about it. I don't have much activity with them. So I can't specifically answer if we do get funds, Jim. But as far as the Agenda 21, I look at it this way, that we should be stewards of the resources. Agenda 21 came about because of fear that we'd run out of air, run out of water, and run out of food, which I think is ridiculous. God created everything, and he will give us what we need to do his calling. The provisions will come. And what this does is it dissolves itself of wisdom and faith. And when they met in 1992 to put this together, that's what happened. And that's why I'm completely against it. It's fear-based, and it leads to results that come out of the fear, which are not good for any of us.
Mr. Sun?
Yes, sir. I'm not favor of funding from an outside source, like how tell us how we should live, how should be. We are who we are. We should be as who we are as individuals. And city of Carrollton, it's like that to me. It's like an ISO 9000, International Standard Quality of 9000. That's created by European nations. They tell us U.S. how we need to be in order to conduct business. We don't need them to tell us how we should live, how we need to conduct ourselves. We can take care of ourselves, like what Mr. Wilder says. You trust in the Lord with all you are. Lean not on your own ways. And always acknowledge him, he will make your path straight. We could do that. We could be ourselves. We could take care of ourselves. So we don't need outside source funding like that.
Okay, thank you. By the way, I believe North Texas Council of Governments is an NGO under Agenda 21 or supportive. It takes funding from Agenda 21. Okay, the next series of questions are going to be some relatively short, simple questions, so hopefully we can just fire them off. So, Mr. Sun, as a city council member, who's your boss?
My boss is people.
Mr. Wilder?
The voters.
Mr. Babbitt?
The voters.
The voters.
Okay. Which political party would you say you're most aligned with?
The Republican Party.
Republican Party.
Republican Party.
Republican.